today we're having a look at Adobe Illustrator. So as much as possible, I do want to make this as interactive as humanly possible. So if you do want to ask a question on the way through, please do interrupt me in whatever way you would like. I may not be able to see the chat, so do try and interrupt.
I can jump in as well, Steve.
That would be awesome, because otherwise I'll just keep on blabbing on, and as I want to do. Okay, so Adobe Illustrator. I actually had a couple of little sample files there sitting on my desktop, so hopefully you can see my computer okay and it's sharing well. So one of the probably the most important question is, why would I use Adobe Illustrator? And here's actually a reason that I particularly used Adobe Illustrator. This was a little project I did some time ago with my brother-in-law, who is a sign writer. And the reason why...
Incredibly slow.
Oh, there's a bit of noise there in the background, so I don't know if it's possible to mute. Okay, so yeah, no, he's a sign writer, and so in that particular case, we use Illustrator because it's the best possible format for a flexible output. And when I say a flexible output, something like a bit of sign writing that could be a banner in a school, which we did quite a few of, or just generic signs are around the place. Illustrator creates the perfect format for those. So when I'm doing something like, in this case, this is a wrap for a car, the logo initially would have been drawn in Illustrator, quite small for print output, but because Illustrator works in what's known as vectors, we can make that huge in any shape, size that we like. So we can do things like have the text actually separate out from the rest of the image, and things like vinyl cutters can actually cut the text individually. So, this is part of the reason that we use Illustrator. Illustrator is also absolutely perfect for working with things such as logos. So, of course, the Adobe logo itself has been drawn in Adobe Illustrator. Illustrator itself is, I think it's fair to say, on an application basis, Adobe's oldest individual still standing application. The reason why we developed Illustrator was so that we could actually draw type. And so if I zoom into, say, the E, for example, I'll just mark here across that E, no matter how close I get to that E, the appearance of that of the text, of the paths of that E look absolutely perfect. So I can zoom in. At the moment I'm at 12,000%, so I'm going very, very close in 17,000%. I can't even remember how far I can actually go. 64,000%, so 64,000%, and the edge of that logo looks still absolutely amazing. So the reason that it does look beautiful is it's actually drawing in our very earliest version of what's known as PostScript, and it creates beautiful vector lines. And it does mean that if I wanted to use this particular printed, this drawn file in Illustrator, if I wanted to put it onto onto a truck or onto a van or even onto a building, I could use the same file format and it would still be beautiful no matter what. The actual file paths are maintained. It does that through the vectors that we draw with Illustrator. So why I use Illustrator is because it creates beautiful vector-based artwork. And a vector would be something as simple. I'm just going to create a new document that create a few different elements in. So a vector could be just a circle, of course. And again, if I zoom into the edge of that, it creates a nice even path. So these are the reasons that I use Illustrator. The other great thing about Illustrator is that if I'll just move this into the middle and even maybe make it a little bit larger. If I have this drawn and I export this to various formats, so let's export as, from Illustrator, I can create lots and lots of different formats, such as bitmap, JPEGs, PSD files, Photoshop documents, scalable vector graphic, which is SVG, even TIFF and text formats, which is kind of bizarre. So I can actually output this to a text format, which would be interesting to have a look at. You could actually read the postscript. Probably the most appropriate for a logo like this is actually PNG. It retains some level of transparency. So when I do have things like the O, and then, well, in fact, all of these letters have an area that is actually cut through. So, you know, if I did draw just a rectangle and just filled it with some color, maybe just any old swatch like so, and actually arrange, send that to back, you can see the areas that that are surrounded by other elements are actually cutting through. So what that means is that it's essentially cut through and is transparent. So when I export this as a PNG will actually maintain the transparent nature of that, of the middle of the O, etc. So if I was to export this as a JPEG, this would actually appear as fully white. This area of white is actually written in the JPEG as a white pixel. And so you can't actually see through the type, as it were, if I was to save this out as a JPEG. So, you know, lots of different file formats can be exported from Illustrator for different purposes. JPEG is obviously great for photographs, not so great for logos such as this, but Illustrator format, absolutely beautiful. And this is actually, I maintain this in a .ai file, which is a .adobe Illustrator file, which is great as a format for all of the Adobe applications, such as InDesign and Photoshop. AI is great. But if I was putting up this on the web, I might use either PNG because of the transparency, or SVG because scalable vector graphics look great in web browsers. But they can also scale to any size as well. So it's a terrific format for the web. Very small, very lightweight, very accurate for vectors. So that's what I use Illustrator for things like logos, for things that might go to sign writing. But I also use it a great deal for creating things like infographics. So for example, I've got here a set of infographics. This infographics set of pages actually came from, I think, Adobe Stock's templates for Illustrator. So these are all Adobe Stock templates. And if I turn on all the layers for this, there we go. We've got charts of various natures. We've got some pie charts, and these particular templates are actually, again, editable templates. So for example, if I right click on the actual data for this particular chart, maybe change that to maybe 35%, and just click the tick there, you can see it actually change. The only problem is that I do have to change some of the text on the actual chart itself because the data has changed. So when it is a live chart, some of the graphics that sit over the top still retain their original drawn element. Now, the reason why, again, I would use, say, Illustrator for doing something like these charts is that I want to keep the highest possible design capability, so that if I am using very specific colors or it's a particular size, the fonts need to be a certain size and height, weight, etc. And I need to ensure that it's as good as possible. So something like PowerPoint does great charts, but it doesn't easily allow us to do any design format that we like. So, in this case, the text is being the pie chart is having each of the elements pointed out by these drawn lines that also match up with the color of the actual pie chart. All of these types of elements are specifically designed and may not be replicable necessarily by any other design somebody else has ever done. Designers are always looking for their own particular way of displaying information. So Illustrator allows us to do anything that we want. It's not limited in any way, shape, or form to any particular look and feel. So that's why designers love Illustrator, because you can create just about anything that you like. Okay, so let's actually have a look at some of the tools that we can use in Illustrator to create objects. So often, I want to come back to this because this is something that I want to use as a basis of creating a new piece of artwork, and I might just zoom into a particular area. So what I did, I actually grabbed the Sustainable Development Goals from I think Wikipedia, and the image itself is great, but if I zoom in nice and close, you can actually see that this particular PNG file, being a PNG, it has a specific number of pixels, and those pixels, if we do zoom in, display as blocks, and those blocks are what makes the image look less great if we have to zoom in close or have a high resolution version of it. Looks fine on a website, but as soon as we use this, maybe we want to print it on a poster or something like that, we'd zoom in on it and we'd actually see all this this messy type of pixelation. So PNG is great for a certain format, but it can't be made to be larger than the pixels are in the first place, because otherwise it does pixelate and looks awful. So what I'll do is actually show how we might actually draw something like these Sustainable Development Goals icons. Okay, so let's actually work with Illustrator and see how it actually works. Because some people kind of feel that it's complicated, and it has a lot of power. It's been around for a very long time, so there's a lot of things that you can actually do with Illustrator. So what I wanted to do is try and make it seem a little bit easier. So for starters, I do always like to point out the selection tool. Selection tool selects objects. So if I draw an object, the selection tool allows me to select that object. So, and then once I've clicked on it, I can sort of move it around. If it has a fill, I can click in the middle of that object. So in this case, the fill is actually white. It's got a fill. How can I tell if it's transparent or white? By looking at it. When I make that object transparent, I can't actually click in the middle of it. I can only click on the path. But if I fill the inside of it with white, so the swatches actually show up as white, now I can actually select the middle of it. So I've got the selection tool for selecting elements that are sitting on my page, and then I can do fun things like change the corners of that box that I've drawn. I can also just pull that back out. With the direct selection tool, so we've got the black arrow and the white arrow, the direct selection tool, I can select parts of this object that I've drawn. So then I can actually change where the position of this path actually goes. And I can select the path itself on any particular point and put that line exactly where I'd like to go by using the direct selection tool. So nice and easy to actually use those two different objects. So that's the selection tool for selecting the overall object, and the direct selection tool for each individual little path. Okay, so this is the way I actually start the process of drawing things out. So again, I might just grab my block to start with. If I hold the Shift key down, it makes sure that the object is a perfect square. If I just click, it'll allow me to draw another rectangle with exactly the same specifications of what I just drew. So it will just pop over the top of that object. Okay, so now I've got two blocks. So again, this is how Illustrator allows me to actually work in interesting different ways, in that having two blocks like this might be the starting point for something larger. So I can use one of the tools that's absolutely amazing, and it's called the Pathfinder tool. And if I bring that up, Pathfinder is awesome in that I can do things like join objects together. And so those, let's see, if I use shape mode, unite, those two objects now actually sit next to each other. So what was two paths now is actually joined and made into a more complex looking path. So if I just undo that, the objects are separate, put them over the top of each other and select both of them, and the first shape mode will actually unite those two parts. So that's cool. The next one I've got is to minus the front. So we'll actually take away the front object from the back object. And I get that sort of concept. So I can cut into objects. I can also do something like the intersection, which brings me something like that. And I'll undo again and just do the exclude. So then we get an actual gap in between. And if I add fill to both of those, you get the idea that what I've done is actually excluded the background. And if I did draw another object that sat behind those two, so fill that with orange and send that to the back, whoops, select that and arrange send to back, you get the idea that the middle has actually been blocked out. So that's how we start the process of actually removing elements from our chart, and from, say, text and things like that. So, you know, if I was creating an O in the way that a font sort of creates it, I'd draw one part of the O, then I'd copy that and paste that, grab another part of the O, and then in that case, what I would do, select both of those and exclude overlapping areas. And let's fill that, and you can see that I've created something of an O by actually excluding the object that overlaps, which happened to be the middle part. So I can draw more complex images by putting multiple things together and using our wonderful Pathfinder to actually pull those together, so making more complex things. One little project that I set myself was actually to design a bit of a bed head for my daughter. So what I did is I wanted to create a castle. So in creating a castle, just in the tools over here, I can actually make this the default fill. So that goes back to a white fill and a black border. The black border is actually defined by the stroke up here, which is 1 point at the moment, but I can make that thicker if I want, but I'll just leave it at 1. So the bed head that I wanted to create was kind of like a castle type circumstance. So I drew initially just the majority of the bed head. Then what I wanted is turrets. Again, just do nice and rough. Doesn't have to be too perfect. And then with the Illustrator, I can just option, click and drag and create a second turret there. And that's a good starting point. Then we have the little balustrades that pop over the top. And Illustrator also allows me to do one and then do Command D, which duplicates over and over again that little object. So I'm getting a little bit more of a complex set of images pulling together. So next I need kind of like the dome to the tops of the turret. So rather than draw my own rectangle, which I could do with the pen tool, I'm actually going to use the polygon tool to create a rectangle. So if I click and hold on the rectangle, I get the options for things like stars and the polygon tool here. So I can use the polygon tool and just click, and this polygon will actually have three sides because it's a triangle that's going to be the top of my turrets. So then I just draw it over the top, and I've got a more complex shape that I can also put over the top of this one over here. Oops. I actually want to duplicate it, so I want to hold down the Alt or Option key and make a more complex thing. So it doesn't look perfect because of all the overlaps and all the other bits. But again, I've got the capabilities of these shape modes to bring them all together. So I just have to unite them and click once, and I've kind of got my design for my bed head nice and simply by just drawing simple elements and pulling them all together. So again, Illustrator, you don't want to think of it as being a complex drawing application. It's all about just working with shapes and building out something that's gives the appearance of being quite complex to draw, much more simply done. So Illustrator does that very nicely. So if I just click on the object here, I want actually, what I might do is just make this a little bit smaller so I can just bring this castle down, because the next thing I want to do is actually, with my drawing, just create a little bit of a scene for my drawing that I'm creating. And I want to put a crescent moon up the top here. So the crescent moon is actually going to be made up of a couple of circles, and I'm going to use the Pathfinder again for this. So all I've got to do is just draw an initial circle, and again I'm just going to copy this and paste it and place it over the top, and I think that's kind of the spot that I want it to go. And what I'm going to do this time is remove the foreground from the background, and I've got a nice little sort of crescent moon happening for the scene that I'm creating. So again, you can start to see that we can get more and more complicated with the things that we create, just based on the drawings that by drawing simple objects and making it more complex. Illustrator is great fun at doing this. Okay. So let's actually work on this to make this a little bit more interesting, because of course we can add lots and lots of colors to our scenes as well. We've got lots and lots of swatches that are available for adding color. So if I just click on one of those colors, it will give me the fill. If I do want to change the path there, I can actually remove the path so that it's just the fill color. And you know, if I wanted to do something quite crazy with the castle here, I might actually look to see if I've got some libraries for swatches that might be a little bit more interesting. So, you know, maybe earth tone type things, or patterns. So I might look at patterns that dots, lines, decorative, nature. No, that's not going to quite do us for it. I do actually have, let's see if earthstone actually works for us. So these won't actually create exactly what we want, but let's just make it the fill And we can sort of work around different colors there to make it look exactly the styles that we want. So these are tones, but we also have some really cool new materials that we can actually use. I'm going to undo that because I'm going to find something that's just perfect for me. 3D and materials. So we do have now some really cool materials. So sand step dune sounds kind of interesting, but these materials are actually substance materials, and they've got some wild and wonderful materials for our, I think, not plywood, thinking more of a stone type option. So let's see if I can find something.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
Where did you go in and get the 3D materials from?
Okay, so
Sorry, I missed that bit.
thank you for asking, because sometimes I jump in and I start doing stuff. Every panel that I have available to me, and I should have sort of gone through the interface, every panel that I have available to me is actually under the window menu. So 3D and materials is relatively new. So if your version of Illustrator is up to date, hopefully we have those 3D and materials pop up as an option. Do you see that?
Yes, I've got them now. Thank you.
Awesome. These are actually substance materials, so they're really solidly interesting looking materials, and we can actually do some 3D objects inside Illustrator and export those to formats. But these materials are certainly really interesting for the designs that we can create. So that actually doesn't look too bad. What I might have to do over the top is maybe create a bit of an effect with bricks and things like that, but you sort of get the idea. We're doing some interesting things. Okay, so Adobe Illustrator, complex paths and making them appear a little bit simpler. So the next thing I'd like to introduce you to is the pen tool, because the pen tool is probably one of the most valuable tools for working in Adobe Illustrator. So I just actually create a new page in my document with the artboard tool. So all I've got to do is actually move along a little bit to the rest of my artboard over on the right, and then draw another artboard over. Artboard is kind of like a page in Illustrator parlance. So that's just creating a brand new page. And I'm going to draw a few things with the pen tool. The pen tool is probably, and I'm going to click and hold on that pen tool and bring out all of the options for the various pen tools there. So I've got the pen tool itself. I've got an add a point, delete an anchor point, and a change the anchor point tool. So the anchor point tool changes existing anchor points. So the concept of the pen tool is that if I click, it creates an anchor point, a place to which I'm starting my drawing. So I can then put the next part of my path absolutely anywhere. So then I can click to create a path, and it will then start to allow me to go over to another point if I so wish. So again, I can click, and then I can close it off and close the path by clicking on the original starting point, and I have my paths. So just to go through that again, so I can put the next part of my path absolutely anywhere. So I might sort of make a diamond kind of look and close that off. Or if I don't want to close it off, I can actually click over on my selection tool and just leave the path without closing it. So what I had to do there is start the process of drawing, go, okay, I've finished what I've done. If I click on a different tool, like the selection tool, then it will allow me to close that path off without having to draw another place the point into another point. So it allows me to finish off that line without going to the end. But what if I did now decide, okay, I want to close that path off? So again, what I can do is grab my pen tool and actually click over the existing path and pick it up again and then close it, which is kind of neat. So closing it off means it's now finished. Okay, so that's just using the pen tool to actually do a couple of simple options there. So by clicking on one of the existing points, so if I do click if I go over the middle of a path, you can actually see it turns to a pen with a plus, which means it will actually add a point to that existing line. If I go to a point at the end, it allows me to pick up that point and finish it off. Okay, but then I can grab my add anchor point and maybe add an anchor point to that existing path. So what does that mean? It means that I can grab that anchor point that I've just added and change the direction of that anchor point and make it place exactly where I'd like it to go. So by adding an anchor point, I'm just adding additional points to my path. Naturally, if I delete an anchor point, it removes it from that path. So sometimes you find yourself just flicking between a particular pen, hold down the Option key and you get the plus, and you can add an anchor point and maybe delete an anchor point over there. Maybe hold down the Alt or Option key and add another point. Grab my direct selection tool and change that path to how I'd like it to go. So those are just simple paths. Let's start to make these a little bit more complex. So with the anchor point selected, if I click and hold, I get these Bezier handles. We call these Bezier handles. And then I can start to place essentially I've placed a point, and by clicking and dragging, I get the handles that will work with Illustrator to create a bent path. So if I just hold down the Shift key, it will constrain it to 45-degree snaps. So if I then go to my next point, you can see that it's actually created a Bezier, sort of kind of like the old French curves concept. And if I click and hold the mouse down, I can grab Bezier curves again. And again, if I hold down the Shift key, it holds it to 45-degree angles. And you can see there, you can start to control the look of that path. And then work to the next spot. You know, maybe I might create something of a love heart style of thing. So pop that there, click and drag, click and drag. Just didn't quite put it where I'd like it to go. I want it to go there. Click and drag, hold the Shift key down to constrain it, and then finish it off by clicking and holding. If I want it to be more of a heart, what I do is just grab the top and bring it in, and then start fiddling around. Now it's not creating the circles that I like. So this is where something like the anchor point tool comes in, where I can actually grab the curves, oops, and pull them around to exactly where I'd like them to go. So you can then start to grab each corner and get them. And what I'm doing is just holding the Command or Control key down to get my direction arrow to bring those up again. And now I've created something of a love heart style of thing. There are a bunch of different ways to actually create something like that, but that's certainly one. If I wanted to use multiple objects to create something like that, what I might do is actually create two circles and pop them together kind of like that, and use my Pathfinder to join those two together. Then maybe grab a rectangle and just rotate that rectangle. If I've drawn something and I want to rotate it, you can see that when I go just outside the object that I have selected, so if I select that object, if if I just go outside the corner, I get a rotate option, and it if I hold down the shift key, it gives me the ability to make it a 45-degree angle. And what I should have done is made that actually a square. So if I draw that, rotate it 45-degree angle, and pop it up onto my existing drawn circles, then I can get it to be positioned around about so. And I don't want that sitting over the top, so then I can pop those two together, and again the shape mode allows me to draw it out. Got a little bit of a bump there, so I can remove that with my selection tools. So just find where the bump actually sits, and then I can remove that path and smooth that out with my selection tool there. And now I've got a bit more of a smooth selection. So a little bit of fiddling around, and you get a nice by using multiple different elements together. So all of the different fills and colors and things like that are part of swatches, and we even have a huge number of swatch libraries that have some like metallic looks, and we also have lots and lots of gradients as well. So having libraries of various gradients in here. So we've got bright color harmonies and earth tones and all sorts of fun gradients that we can use. So I think metals is always pretty cool. So as soon as I bring that panel up, I can select some of those different metallic tones for our heart there. The sort of copper looks pretty cool. So these are all the fills that we have available, which is under the window menu. So we've got our swatch libraries, our graphic styles for various crazy effects, etc. So that's where we start popping into where we start to work on slightly more complex things. So going back to our infographic here, to draw something like the zero hunger option here. So essentially what I want to do is replicate the look and feel of this logo. So I should actually say that how I got this image in the background, if I just close off some of these elements, I actually created a separate layer inside Illustrator and called it background. And I'm going to unlock it now so that I can move this around. This is actually a PNG file that I've dropped onto Illustrator. So I can actually find this image. It's just sitting on my desktop inside here, sustainability, I think it was, and sustainable goals PNG. So then I can just drag that onto Illustrator, and you can see that the sustainable goals popped on. Now I've actually made that it's not a full color, so I did that by actually changing the image dim from 100%. So there's that file actually sitting inside Illustrator, and I dimmed it to about 50% so that I can draw over the top of it. And then I can lock that layer so that I'm not going to mess around with that layer at all, because I want to draw over the top of it. So I'm going to marquee zero hunger and zoom in, because that pixelated version isn't good enough for us. So what I wanted to do is redraw elements of this zero hunger icon. So there's, first of all, I've got kind of this bowl. So I'm just going to draw the bottom part of the bowl, and I can use any color. It doesn't matter. I might actually just go to the standard, and maybe even make the border a little narrower, so 0.25 for the stroke. And then I want to draw a circle over the top of my file. So there, I'll just sort of try and line it up to the edges of the bowl. Let's just get it around about like so, and bring that up a bit and over. So you get sort of getting the idea of what we're trying to do here. So I've got two elements sitting next to each other to get that look and feel. So that's looking pretty good for me. So I'll just draw those two together again. Okay, but the bowl itself does have the top pulled off. So again, I'll just grab another object that I can draw over the top, go that image and that image. I actually want to remove the front so that I just get the bowl. So again, using simple objects to create something that looks to be a little bit more complex. So that one is pretty easy. And just move it around to where it looks good. This next bit will take a little bit of thinking of, because I want to have the steam coming out and I want to draw that. I can do this in a number of different ways, but I'll draw this with my pen tool. And I'll just start by clicking around about there. This is where experience with the pen tool becomes quite valuable. And the more you work with a pen tool, the more you understand how it actually works. Because what I want to do is have as little number of curves as possible, because it makes it more complex to draw objects if I use lots and lots of paths. But I'll make this simple by just clicking and dragging and bringing out those two handles. Then I'll come up to my next section. Oops, just dropped over there. And there's that path. And then I'll just finish off sort of down there like so. And it's not quite right, and it's even got a fill which we want to remove. I want a path that doesn't have a fill. It's just a simple path. So actually, it does curve around kind of like this at the end. So I'm just trying to match up, making everything look pretty much how that curvature sort of goes. Okay, so at the moment, oops, I might bring that up a little bit even further. So again, the more you mess around, the more you get used to this. So this path at the moment doesn't look anything like that at all. And you might be tempted to actually outline that, but I don't want to do that, because I want to do this as simple as possible. So when I have that path selected, what I can do is actually make that path a little bit thicker. And the path at the moment's got a solid edge like so. So what I can do is click on my little stroke options here, and one of the options is for rounded ends, and that's perfect for me, absolutely perfect. So 4-point rounded, awesome. Then I can just duplicate this 3 times, and I've got my steam, but it's not perfect yet, because what I've got to do is actually fill it with a different color and remove the bottom. So what I'm going to do is actually use some of the things that we've started to work with, but introduce one extra element. In fact, what I'm going to do in order to show that element is draw the first object perfectly, and then we'll be able to duplicate those other ones from our drawn one. So just going to move it over a little bit so it's in the right spot. Okay, the concept that I'm going to introduce, so what we did was make this 4-point path, and I'm going to do something called expand. And expand is actually expanding the appearance of this path. So Illustrator, when we first had it, if I showed it how we were starting to draw, this is actually how we started to draw. We had to preview in a whole different mode to actually see how things looked. So things have moved along quite nicely. So that path that we drew is a simple path. So I'm viewing how the actual paths, the outlines of the paths that we've drawn. So in this case, what I'm going to do is expand the appearance of that path. So this is a bit of the terminology that's specific to Illustrator. By expanding the appearance, what I'm going to do is actually expand the fill and stroke of that object. And now if I click on outlines, you'll see it's actually drawn all the way around. So this would be the way I would have had to actually draw that if I did actually outline it. But drawing a single line is so much easier. So click on preview again, and it's looking good. But of course, the bottom is actually removed. So let's just pop an object again over the top, because I want to remove the top object using my Pathfinder again from the one underneath. And then I get my perfect bit of steam, exactly how it was drawn on this infographic as it was previously. So now I can just Alt, Shift, click and drag, and then I can do Command D, which is duplicate, I think, which is under the transform menu, I think here, transform again, Command D, and it makes another object exactly right how the original one was actually drawn. So you can see that with simple shapes and simple objects, we can create more complex graphics. So I can now fill that with white in the same way as the original was. And that bowl also doesn't have a border. It's got a white fill, so I can remove that. And I've now got my drawn version of that graphic. And what I can also do is draw the box that sits underneath that and send that to the background, arrange send to back. Now, of course, my box is not the right color, so I might even just move that a smidge off and change my layers so that I can see the background, and change the layer to 100%. The reason why I'm doing this is because what I want is this fill of this box that I drew on the top layer to actually be exactly the same as that color underneath. And I do that by using my little eyedropper tool, because I'm just going to grab that and then click on the background image. Now I can remove the background image and put our border around that object that we just drew. So it seems like a cumbersome process to actually draw these little widgets, but this is exactly how logos do get done. And now I can zoom right in, and it doesn't matter how I use this particular image, it will always be absolutely perfect, no matter how big or small that image is now. It's no longer that graphic concept that the original ping file was, so it doesn't have those sort of pixelations. It's beautifully drawn, absolutely perfect. So the last options I would obviously have to do is put our text on, which is nice and simple. So this is the process that we do to go through and beautifully draw icons and things like that. So just using simple object, creating the image, and then working forward. So this seems like it can be a little bit complex. So I'm going to show you something that will absolutely blow you away. So I'm going to open up a new document. And in this case, we're going to use Illustrator to, let's see, grab, just looking inside my files here, and I'm going to use the concept of tracing inside Illustrator. So I've got a bit of a logo here that's a panda that was actually just a JPEG. And if I zoom out, it's just a JPEG that I picked up from the web, and I can prove it's a JPEG by zooming in. You can sort of see the pixelation of that JPEG. What I'm going to do in Illustrator now is what was a JPEG, I'm actually going to trace. So I go into Image Trace, and now what I'm going to do is click on Trace, and it will actually trace that object. So when I did all that drawing of those elements, sometimes you do want to draw an object to keep its the image as it was, and draw over the top in exactly the way that I did with that icon. Or sometimes you can rely on Image Trace, which does an amazing job of taking what was a JPEG. Now if I zoom in here, the curves are really, really good. And I do have lots of options for how that curve actually, how it will keep close to the curves. So, I've got some, I can sort of see some of the borders appearing a little bit better and more soft around edges, depending on the actual underlying JPEG that we had. So eventually I'll get nice and close to exactly the sort of intent that I'd like. So that's for a black and white. For a logo for doing our trace. But what if the actual image wasn't much good? It was kind of like this one, which is a coffee stained thing that was popped onto a, I'll zoom out a little bit so that we can actually see it. This is actually quite a big image. It's like a coffee stained napkin that's been scanned. So how would image trace work on this one? So let's have a crack. If I click on trace on this, so it goes through and traces it. Now, the thing is, what we want is something that's not fully perfect. So what I can do is just drag this threshold down to the point where I actually get the number of paths that I'm really after. And you can see that what was a coffee stained napkin with a bit of a logo on now is the perfect logo for us to start working with, which is awesome. So tracing can be perfect for us. We can even, with Illustrator, grab photographs. So again, I'll zoom out a little bit because this image is pretty big, and I need to make this a tracing. So why would I want to go about a trace of something like this? So what starts off as a photograph, again, think about when you use a photograph, there's a number of things that it's really great for. So if the image quality is high enough, you can zoom it up nice and big and you can put it on the side of a building or something like that. But what you might actually want to do is make it vectors so that it can output for different types of options. So as an example, I can actually create different effects based on a vector-based set of effects that I might not be able to do necessarily with an image. So let's try a few different things. So if I click on trace here in the image trace options, first up it's black and white. So what we want to do is change that to color. And let's just see how the options come up. So there are a bunch of presets that we can use, and you can see Illustrator is working hard to actually create this image. And what was a photograph, if I zoom in closely to areas of this, is kind of like now a paint by numbers look and feel. So zoom back out, if I zoom to various elements, you can see that it's now really become paint by numbers. And how somebody has actually used this is they've created the photograph, and you can choose exactly how many colors it actually uses as well. So in this case, I can say, okay, I don't want to paint with 30 colors, but maybe 12 colors might be good. So I can actually dial in the precise number of colors that this will use. So they've grabbed Illustrator and actually projected this the screen onto a wall where they've had a canvas, and they've actually drawn all of the outlines that they then can actually paint the original. So for an exact paint by numbers concept, so that actually starts looking really, really cool. But Illustrator can do so much more, because once I'm happy with the way this looks, again, I can expand the appearance of this image, and this will now actually make it a vectorized, more complex image. If I show the outline again, you can see all of the paths that have been drawn really, really rapidly, which is awesome. But again, Illustrator is a great application for doing very, very clever things. Oh, light just went off in the room here, because I can actually remap all of the colors in this image against a set of colors that I can choose. So at the moment it's looking quite sort of brown, but maybe what I really want to do is have a look at different color groups. So maybe brights, see how that actually looks. And we've got an entirely different look and feel. And I can, dull it down a little bit, maybe even change where all the colors actually apply, just by completely changing this image. And we've got something that started off as a photograph of Venice, and it now has a completely different look that I actually kind of like. So I might keep this one, which is very cool. So Illustrator is all about creativity and doing some interesting things, but the trace capability has just brought us up a level of doing things that we never could before, just because of the quality of that trace and the speed of which it does it. Because in the past I would have had to carefully draw with the pen tool every element to actually get that effect. So tracing is absolutely amazing. I have been talking on now for a little over an hour, so I better stop and see if there's any questions or anything that you'd like to have made a little bit clearer, because I've covered off a lot of stuff.
Feel free to come off mute or add a question in the chat.
More than happy to answer any questions that you might have had with things that you've worked on in Illustrator before, or perhaps I've just done it too fast in that session just then. Everyone's very quiet.
They are indeed. Priscilla or Stephen, did you have any questions?
I'll quickly come off mute. I like the whole session. I'm definitely going to be using this with the design kids in year 11, because they're doing architecture, and I think like the different textures would be cool for them to use to show what the building would look like. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Steve, just on those textures, can you change how dense they are? So for example, I put a gold thing on my castle and it came out as quite big.
Yep.
Can you make that, like, can you change how?
Absolutely. So
Yep.
the options, if we bring out this a little bit more, so we've got how often they repeat. So we can actually drag that along, and you can even change the fold variations and other things. Just to you have to be a little bit patient when you make a change sometimes, because it can be quite dense. But all of these are about the parameters that are working through about just changing the look and feel. It's got huge amounts of options, and
that would be handy, I imagine, if you're using it as building materials as well.
Absolutely. In fact, where substance is mostly used is actually obviously in the substance applications, and that's precisely what you can use it for. You can create quite amazing things in the 3D applications. Illustrator is obviously using just a portion of that just to make it pretty cool, but yeah, you can do quite amazing different options there. So yeah, there's steel plate lentils there, which is really cool. So create our effects. And there is there's other 3D planes that we can use with perspective as well. So we can put objects with the perspective selection tool. We can put objects onto a perspective plane that you know, for those sorts of building concepts, makes that kind of thing interesting as well. So that's the perspective plane tool. So you create your grid, and then you use the perspective selection tool to place objects onto that perspective plane for that effect. Pretty cool. Yeah, so these have only just been brought in just recently. Very cool.
They do look lots of fun to play around with and experiment with.
Absolutely. Great fun.
Well, I'm thinking, unless Priscilla and Stephen, you have anything specific you want Stephen to go over, we might leave it a little bit early. What do you think, Steve?
Yep. I think an hour and a half of Illustrator blows people's brains a little bit too much, I reckon. There's so much to it. There is definitely no end of learning that we can do with Illustrator.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen, for doing this presentation. Hopefully those of you that watch this after the event get something out of the recording as well. I know, even though I have used Illustrator a tiny bit, I learned some really cool things today as well. So that's really good. And thank you yet again, Adobe, for putting on this webinar just for us as well. So thank you.
No problem.
And I will stop the recording.
Thanks very much.